The funeral was small. Just Thomas Reed and his daughter Pearl and the cook who had been with them for 8 months. They stood on the hill behind the cabin where Thomas's wife was buried, and now his son was being laid beside her. The boy had been 6 years old. Pneumonia had taken him in 3 days. Pearl was crying silently, her small hand clutching her father's coat. And beside them, Sarah Bowen stood with her head bowed and her hands clasped. And when the last prayer was said and Thomas began filling in the grave, she whispered, "I was only the cook. I should not even be here." Thomas stopped, set down the shovel, took her hand in his dirt-covered one and said, "You sat with him every night for 3 days. You made him smile when he was dying. You held my daughter when I could not. You are not only anything. You are family." Stories like this one remind you that worth is not defined by a title or a wage. It is defined by what you do when everything falls apart. If you want more stories about the people who show up when it matters most, subscribe so you never miss one. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Because what happened after Thomas Reed took Sarah Bowen's hand at that grave became the story people told in Silver Creek, Montana, for the next 60 years about what it means to matter. Sarah Bowen came to the Reed homestead in September of 1883, when the first snow was already dusting the mountains. She answered an advertisement Thomas had posted in town. Cook and housekeeper needed, room and board, modest wages. She was 27 years old and plain-looking, with brown hair pulled tight in a bun and a face that people forgot 5 minutes after meeting her. She was exactly the kind of woman men hired to be invisible. Thomas Reed met her at the base of the mountain trail. He was 34 years old, tall and quiet, with a beard that needed trimming and eyes that looked tired even when he smiled. His daughter Pearl was 5 years old and had not spoken since her mother died, giving birth to her brother Michael 2 years before. "You are Sarah Bowen," Thomas said. "Yes, sir." "You understand the work? Cooking, cleaning, minding the children when I am working?" "I understand." "The cabin is 5 miles up. It is isolated, no neighbors. If you cannot handle that, say so now." "I can handle it." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he gestured to the wagon. "Get in." The cabin was bigger than Sarah expected, but lonelier. It sat in a clearing surrounded by pine trees, with mountains rising on 3 sides and the valley stretching out below. Inside it was clean but sparse. A main room with a kitchen and table. 2 bedrooms upstairs. A small room off the kitchen where Sarah would sleep. Thomas showed her around quickly. Meals at sunrise, noon, and sunset. I work the trap lines most days. Michael is 2 years old. Pearl is 5. She does not talk. The doctor says there is nothing wrong with her voice. She just chooses not to use it. Why? Because her mother died, and she was there when it happened. Thomas's voice was flat, matter of fact. She saw things a child should not see. Now she does not talk. Maybe she will talk again someday. Maybe she will not. Either way, she needs watching. Sarah nodded. "I will take care of them. That is what I am paying you for." Thomas picked up his coat. "I will be back at sunset." He left. Sarah stood in the silent cabin with 2 silent children staring at her and wondered what she had gotten herself into. The first few weeks were difficult. Pearl would not talk to her, would not even look at her most of the time. The girl spent her days sitting by the window, staring at nothing, and when Sarah tried to engage her, Pearl would just walk away or go limp and unresponsive. Michael was easier. He was 2 and did not know any better than to accept whoever fed him and changed him and carried him around. He laughed when Sarah made faces. He called her Sarah in his baby voice. He followed her everywhere. But Pearl was a ghost, present but not there, alive but not living. Sarah tried everything. She asked Pearl questions and got no response. She offered her food. Pearl ate mechanically, like she tasted nothing. She tried to get Pearl to help with chores, and the girl would comply with empty eyes and automatic movements. Nothing reached her. Thomas did not help. He worked from dawn until dark, and came home exhausted and ate whatever Sarah put in front of him, without comment. Without tasting it, he played with Michael for a few minutes before bed, tossed him in the air, made him laugh. But he barely looked at Pearl, and when he did look at her, his face would do something complicated and pained, and he would look away fast. It was like he had given up on her, or like looking at her hurt too much. Sarah could not tell which. One evening in October, Sarah was making bread when she heard crying from upstairs. Not loud crying, soft, desperate crying that sounded like it had been going on for a while. She wiped her hands on her apron and ran up the stairs. Found Pearl standing by the window in her nightgown, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking. She was pointing at something outside with one small hand while the other pressed against the glass. Sarah looked out and saw a deer at the edge of the clearing. Just a doe, grazing peacefully in the last light of day, her coat brown and smooth in the golden hour. "It is just a deer," Sarah said softly, kneeling beside her. "It is all right. It will not hurt you." Pearl shook her head violently, kept pointing, kept crying. Her breath was coming in gasps now. Sarah realized the girl was not scared of the deer. She was trying to show Sarah something, trying to communicate the only way she knew how, trying to share something she found beautiful or meaningful, but had no words for anymore. Sarah knelt down eye level with her. "Do you like the deer?" Pearl nodded desperately. Her eyes were grateful that Sarah understood. "Do you want to watch it?" Another nod. So Sarah picked her up. She was so light, too light, like she had not been eating enough, and carried her to the rocking chair by the window and sat down with Pearl in her lap. They watched the deer together in silence, watched it graze and lift its head to test the air, watched it move slowly across the clearing, pausing every few steps, watched until it disappeared into the trees and the light faded to dark. Pearl leaned her head against Sarah's shoulder and fell asleep there. Sarah sat in the rocking chair holding this silent, broken child and felt something crack open in her chest. She had thought she was just here to cook and clean, had thought she was hired help and nothing more. But sitting there with Pearl's warm weight against her and the darkness settling in outside, she realized she was already more than that. Already tangled up in these lives. Already caring more than she should. After that, things changed. Pearl still did not talk, but she started staying near Sarah, started helping with small tasks, setting the table, folding laundry, sweeping the floor. She would stand beside Sarah in the kitchen and watch her cook. And when Sarah handed her a spoon to stir, Pearl would stir carefully, seriously, like it was the most important job in the world. Thomas noticed. One evening he said, "Pearl is different." "How so?" "She follows you around. She did not do that before. She is lonely. She needs someone to pay attention to her. I pay attention to her. You work all day and come home exhausted and barely look at her." Sarah said it gently, but firmly. "She thinks you do not want her." Thomas's face went hard. "That is not true." "Then show her it is not true. Play with her. Talk to her. Even if she does not talk back, she needs to know you see her." Thomas stood up from the table and walked outside. Sarah thought she had overstepped, thought he would fire her for speaking out of turn. But the next morning at breakfast, Thomas asked Pearl if she wanted to help him check the traps. Pearl looked at him with wide eyes. Then she nodded. And Thomas took her hand and led her outside. And Sarah watched them walk up the trail together and felt something in her chest loosen. After that, Thomas started spending more time with Pearl. He taught her to identify animal tracks, showed her how to bait a trap, let her help carry the small pelts. Pearl still did not talk, but she smiled sometimes, and that was enough. But it was Michael who brought Sarah and Thomas together. Michael was a bright, happy child who laughed easily and loved everyone. He followed Sarah around the kitchen and helped by making messes, spilling flour, dropping spoons, getting into everything. He climbed on chairs and tables and anything he could reach. He never stopped moving, never stopped exploring. Sarah loved him immediately, could not help it. He was impossible not to love. He reminded her of the children she had always wanted, but never had. The family she had always dreamed of, but thought she would never get. One afternoon in late November, Michael was playing by the fire while Sarah cooked. She had given him a wooden spoon and a pot to bang on, his favorite game. She turned her back for 30 seconds to stir the stew and heard a crash. Turned around and saw Michael had pulled a lamp off the table trying to climb up. The glass had shattered. Oil was spreading across the floor in a dark pool, and flames were starting to catch on the rug. Sarah moved faster than she thought possible, grabbed Michael and shoved him into Pearl's arms. The girl had been setting the table. "Take him outside, now." Pearl ran. Sarah grabbed the blanket from the rocking chair and threw it over the flames, stamped on it with her boots, smothered it until the fire was out, stood there shaking, smoke in her lungs, holding the charred blanket, staring at the burned rug and the broken glass and realizing how close they had come. Thomas came running in from outside, saw the burned blanket and the broken lamp and the oil on the floor, saw Sarah standing there, covered in soot, shaking, saw Pearl outside the door holding a crying Michael. "What happened?" His voice was sharp with fear. "The lamp fell. Michael pulled it down. I put the fire out. Everyone is fine." Thomas took Michael from Pearl's arms and checked him over with frantic hands. No burns, no cuts, no injuries. Just scared. He held the boy tight against his chest and looked at Sarah. "You could have been hurt." "But I was not. You moved fast. I had to." Sarah's hands were still shaking. She could not make them stop. "He is just a baby." "I could not let him." Her voice broke. She could not finish the sentence, could not say the words out loud, could not imagine what would have happened if she had been slower, if the fire had spread faster, if she had not been there. Thomas handed Michael back to Pearl, told her to take him upstairs. Then he pulled Sarah into his arms and held her while she shook. Just held her. Did not say anything. Just held her tight enough that she could feel his heart pounding against her ear. Feel that he had been just as scared as she was. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice rough. "Thank you for saving him. Thank you for being here. Thank you for—" He stopped. Could not finish either. Sarah pressed her face against his chest and tried to stop shaking. This was the first time anyone had held her in years. The first time she had felt safe since she could not remember when. The first time she had felt like she mattered to someone. She pulled away after a moment, embarrassed, suddenly aware that she was covered in soot and oil and that she had just been in his arms. "I am sorry. I should not. Do not apologize." Thomas's hands were still on her shoulders. His eyes were intense. "You saved my son. You have nothing to apologize for, ever." After that night, something shifted between them. Thomas started talking to her after the children went to bed. Started sitting at the table with coffee and asking about her day. Started telling her about the traps and the animals and the mountain. They talked about small things and big things and everything in between. Sarah learned that Thomas had loved his wife desperately and blamed himself for her death. That he felt like he had failed Pearl by not being able to help her. That he worked himself to exhaustion because it was easier than sitting still with his grief. Thomas learned that Sarah had been engaged once, but her fiancé had broken it off when he saw someone prettier. That she had been working as a cook for 7 years, moving from place to place, never staying anywhere long enough to be more than hired help. That she had never felt like she belonged anywhere until she came to this isolated cabin on this lonely mountain. In December, Michael got sick. It started as a cough on a Monday morning. By Tuesday, it was a fever. By Wednesday, he could not breathe right, and his lips were turning blue and his little chest was heaving with every breath. Sarah and Thomas took turns sitting with him, day and night trying everything they knew. Steam tents, cold compresses, herbs, prayer. Nothing worked. The fever climbed higher. The breathing got worse. Pearl sat by the door to Michael's room for 3 days straight. Did not eat. Did not sleep. Just sat there with her arms wrapped around her knees, rocking slightly, watching. Sarah tried to get her to come away, to rest, to eat something. But Pearl would not move, would not leave her brother. On the 3rd night, Michael was struggling so hard to breathe that every breath sounded like it was tearing him apart. Thomas was holding him, tears streaming down his face, and Sarah was preparing another steam tent even though she knew it was not going to work, even though she knew they were losing him. And then Pearl stood up. She walked into the room on shaky legs, climbed onto the bed beside Thomas, put her small hand on Michael's chest, right over his struggling heart, and then she spoke for the first time in 2 years. "Please do not die," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse from disuse, broken, beautiful. "Please, Michael, please stay. I love you, please." Thomas started crying harder. Sarah started crying. They stared at Pearl like she had performed a miracle. And Michael, through his fever and his struggling breath and his pain, opened his eyes and looked at his sister. And he smiled. Just smiled. Like he knew she had found her voice for him. Like he was proud of her. But he died anyway. 2 hours later. His breathing got slower and slower, and then it just stopped. He was in Thomas's arms when it happened. Sarah was holding Thomas. Pearl was holding Michael's hand. And then he was gone. Just gone. The room went quiet. The cabin went quiet. Everything went quiet. Sarah helped wash his small body, helped dress him in his best clothes, a little shirt Catherine had made before she died. Helped Thomas build the small coffin from pine wood. They worked in silence, moving through the motions because movement was all they had. Pearl sat nearby and watched and did not speak again. The words had been used up, given to her brother as a final gift. They buried him on the hill behind the cabin next to his mother, and Sarah stood there feeling like her heart had been ripped out of her chest. At the end of the service, when it was just the 3 of them, Sarah whispered, "I was only the cook. I should not even be here." Thomas stopped shoveling, set down the tool, took her hand in his dirt-covered one, and looked at her with red-rimmed eyes. "You sat with him every night for 3 days when I had to sleep. You made him smile even when he was dying. You held my daughter when I could not hold anyone. You are not only the cook. You are not only anything. You are family. You have been family since the day you arrived. And you will be family for as long as you stay." Sarah's throat was so tight she could barely breathe. "I am just hired help." "No." Thomas's voice was firm, certain. You are the woman who saved Pearl from drowning in grief. You are the woman who kept this house running when I was falling apart. You are the woman who loved my son like he was yours. That is not hired help. That is family. Pearl was standing beside them. She reached out and took Sarah's other hand, did not say anything, just held on tight. I do not want to be just the cook, Sarah whispered. Then do not be. Thomas pulled her closer. Stay, not as hired help, as mine, as ours. Marry me. Help me raise Pearl. Help me survive this. Help me remember that life is still worth living, even when the worst has happened. You are asking me to marry you? Now? Here? I am asking you because there is no one else I want. Because you are already family and I want to make it real. Because I love you and I think maybe you love us too. Sarah looked at Michael's grave, at Pearl holding her hand, at Thomas with his dirty face and his broken heart and his certain eyes. I do love you, all of you. Then say yes. Yes. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Silver Creek. Pearl stood between them during the ceremony, holding both their hands. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, no one did. When it was over, Thomas kissed Sarah and Pearl hugged them both, and someone in the back started clapping. At the reception, someone asked Sarah how she went from cook to wife. I did not go from one to the other, Sarah said. I was never just a cook. I was a woman who showed up and did the work and loved the people I was caring for. And Thomas saw that. He saw that I was not invisible, that I mattered. That is not a promotion. That is recognition. They lived in that cabin for the next 40 years. Sarah raised Pearl like she was her own. Watched her grow into a strong, kind woman who became a teacher and never stopped talking once she started. They had 2 more children, boys who filled the cabin with noise and laughter and life. Michael was never forgotten. They visited his grave every week, put flowers there every spring, told stories about him so the younger children would know who their brother was. And every year, on the anniversary of his death, the whole family would stand on that hill and remember. People in Silver Creek talked about Thomas and Sarah Reed for 60 years. They talked about how she came to cook and stayed to love, how she had thought she was just hired help, until Thomas told her otherwise at his son's grave. How sometimes the people who matter most are the ones who do not ask for recognition, but deserve it anyway. And they talked about what Pearl Reed said when she grew up and someone asked her who Sarah was. She was my mother, Pearl said simply. Not the woman who gave birth to me, but the woman who gave me my voice back. The woman who made me feel safe enough to speak again. The woman who stayed when she could have left. That is what a mother is, and she was mine. Sarah Reed died in 1923 at the age of 67. Thomas died 6 months later. They were buried on the hill behind the cabin beside Michael and Catherine. On Sarah's headstone, Thomas had carved the words he told her that day at the grave. You are not only anything, you are family. You have been family since the day you arrived, and you will be family forever.